Hello, everybody. Welcome to the channel of Richmond Bio Baptist Church. My name is Pastor Alan Salamatin. Today, I'm going to speak about the book of Exodus. After nearly 400 years of growth in Egypt, the infant nation Israel is now ready to leave behind the chains of slavery and seek a new homeland. Exodus narrates the liberation of Israel from Egyptian captivity and the migration of God's new nation to the wilderness of Sinai. Moses, the great deliverer, announces 10 devastating plagues of judgment upon Egypt, then leads the Israelites on the first leg of their journey to the Promised Land. So, for your information, chapters 1 to 18 relate Israel's exodus from bondage in Egypt, while chapters 19 to 40 record the instructions given by God on Mount Sinai to direct the life and worship of the nation. Exodus is the record of Israel's birth as a nation. Within the protective womb of Egypt, the Jewish family of 70 rapidly multiplies. At the right time, accompanied by severe birth pains, an infant nation numbering between 2 and 3 million people is brought into the world where it is divinely protected, fed, and nurtured. The Hebrew title, "and these are the names," comes from the first phrase in Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. It begins with the Hebrew for "and" to show it as a continuation of Genesis. The Greek title is Exodus, a word meaning exit, departure, or going out. The Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, uses this word to describe the book by its key event, which can be seen in chapter 19, verse 1, gone out. In Luke chapter 9, verse 31, and in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 15, the word Exodus speaks of physical death. This embodies Exodus' theme of redemption, because redemption is accomplished only through death. The Latin title means the Book of Departure, which is also taken from the Greek title. Some critics have challenged the authorship of Exodus in favor of a series of oral and written documents that were woven together by editors late in Israel's history. Their arguments are generally weak and far from conclusive, especially in view of the strong external and internal evidence that points to Moses as the author. Exodus has been attributed to Moses since the time of Joshua. Other biblical writers attribute Exodus to Moses, Malachi, the disciples, and Paul. This is also the testimony of Jesus. Jewish and Samaritan traditions consistently hold to the Mosaic authorship of Exodus. How about the internal evidence of Moses being the writer of the book of Exodus? Portions of Exodus are directly attributed to Moses, and Moses' usual procedure was to record events soon after they occurred in the form of historical annals. It is clear from Exodus that the author must have been an eyewitness of the Exodus and an educated man. He was acquainted with details about the customs and climate of Egypt and the plants, animals, and terrain of the wilderness. A consistency of style and development also points to a single author. Its antiquity is supported by the frequent use of ancient literary constructions, words, and expressions. How about the date and the setting of this book of Exodus? If the early date for the Exodus, which is about 1445 BC, is assumed, this book was composed during the 40-year wilderness journey, which is between 1445 BC and 1405 BC. Moses probably kept an account of God's work, which he then edited in the plains of Moab, shortly before his death. Exodus covers the period from the arrival of Jacob in Egypt, circa 1875 BC, to the erection of the tabernacle 431 years later in the wilderness, circa 1445 BC. What are the theme and the purpose of this book? There are two basic themes in Exodus, and both tie in together. The first theme is redemption, portrayed in the Passover, and the second theme is deliverance, portrayed in the Exodus from Egypt. This redemption and deliverance was accomplished through the shedding of blood and by the power of God. Exodus was written to portray the birth of Israel as the nation that would bring God's rule on earth. It records the story of Israel's redemption under the leadership of Moses. It also serves as an expose of the falsehood of idolatry. Yahweh is revealed as infinitely superior to any so-called gods. Exodus also teaches that obedience to God is necessary for a redeemed and set-apart people. The key word to Exodus is redemption. And the key verses can be found in chapter 6, verse 6, as well as chapter 19, verses 5 to 6. Chapter 6, verse 6 says, "Therefore say to the Lord, to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments." Chapter 19, verses 5 to 6 says, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." The key chapters can be found in chapters 12 to 14. The climax of the entire Old Testament is recorded in these three chapters, 12 to 14. The salvation of Israel through blood, the Passover, and through power, the Red Sea. The Exodus is the central event of the Old Testament, as the cross is of the New Testament. Can we find Christ in Exodus? Exodus contains no direct messianic prophecies, but it is full of types, symbols, or portraits of Christ. There are 7. The first one is Moses. In dozens of ways, Moses is a type of Christ. Both Moses and Christ are prophets, priests, and kings. Although Moses was never made king, he functioned as the ruler of Israel. Both are kinsman redeemers. Both are endangered in infancy. Both voluntarily renounce power and wealth. Both are deliverers, lawgivers, and mediators. Second, the Passover. John chapter 1, verse 29 and 36, and 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 makes it clear that Christ is our slain God and the Passover lamb. Number 3, the 7 feast. Each of these feasts portrays some aspect of the ministry of Christ. Number 4, the Exodus. Paul relates baptism to the Exodus event because baptism symbolizes death to the old and identification with the new. Number 5, the manna and water. The New Testament applies both to Christ. Number 6, the tabernacle. In its materials, colors, furniture, and arrangement, the tabernacle clearly speaks of the person of Christ and the way of redemption. The development is progressive from suffering, blood, and death to beauty, holiness, and the glory of God. The tabernacle is theology in a physical form. And lastly, number 7, the high priest. In several ways, the high priest foreshadows the ministry of Christ, our great high priest. What is the contribution of Exodus to the whole Bible? Exodus accounts for many of religious ceremonies and customs of Israel, the creation of the tabernacle, the formation of the priesthood, the Mosaic law, and the sacrificial system. As such, Exodus is foundational for the following history of Israel. It describes how the Israelites escaped from Egypt, became the covenant people of God, and came to know his presence and his ways. Exodus stands at the heart of the Old Testament as the greatest example of the saving acts of God before Christ. It provides the framework for the rest of the Old Testament message. The Passover, the Exodus, Moses, the law, and the tabernacle dominated the thought of Israel's for centuries to come. Let me give you a survey of Exodus. Exodus abounds with God's powerful, redemptive acts on behalf of his oppressed people. It begins in pain and ends in liberation. It moves from the groaning of the people to the glory of God. It is the continuation of the story that begins in Genesis with the 70 descendants of Jacob who moved from Canaan to Egypt. They have multiplied under adverse conditions to a multitude of over 2 million people. When the Israelites finally turn to God for deliverance from their bondage, God quickly responds by redeeming them with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. God faithfully fulfills his promise made to Abraham centuries before. This book falls into two parts. The first one is redemption from Egypt 1 to 18, and then the second one from chapters 19 to 40 is the revelation from God. The first one, redemption from Egypt in chapters 1 to 18, says that after 4 centuries of slavery, the people of Israel cried to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for deliverance. God has already prepared Moses for this purpose, and he has commissioned him at the burning bush to stand before Pharaoh as the advocate for Israel. However, Pharaoh hardens his heart. And he said in Exodus 5:2, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go?" God soon reveals himself to Pharaoh through a series of object lessons, the 10 plagues. These plagues grow in severity until the 10th brings death to the firstborn of every household of Egypt. Israel is redeemed through this plague by means of the Passover lamb. The Israelites' faith in God at this point becomes the basis for their national redemption. As they leave Egypt, God guides them by a pillar of fire and smoke and saves them from Egypt's pursuing army through the miraculous crossing of the sea. In the wilderness, he protects and sustains them throughout their journeys. The second part of the survey is revelation from God, 19 to 40. Now that the people have experienced God's deliverance, guidance, and protection, they are ready to be taught what God expects of them. The redeemed people must now be set apart to walk with God. This is why the emphasis moves from narration in chapters 1 to 18 to legislation in chapters 19 to 40. On Mount Sinai, Moses receives God's moral, civil, and ceremonial laws, as well as the pattern for the tabernacle to be built in the wilderness. After God judges the people for their worship of the golden calf, the tabernacle is constructed and consecrated. It is a building of beauty in a barren land and reveals much about the person of God in the way of redemption. That's it for now. That's the summary of the book of Exodus. I hope you'll join me again next time as we discuss the summary of the book of Leviticus. May you have a good week, everybody, and God bless you all. Bye-bye.